The festivities at the Prescott estate were in full swing, a symphony of clinking champagne flutes and forced laughter celebrating Leo's reclaimed authority. But Leo wasn't there. He had slipped out a side door, a ghost at his own party, and made his way to the quiet stone manor on the far side of the compound where Julian Vance lived. He found the man in his study, a single desk lamp casting long shadows across walls of mahogany and leather-bound books. Julian looked up from a file, a brow arched in amusement. He observed the way Leo's expensive suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled, and his voice, when he finally spoke, was a ragged plea. He didn't know how Julian could just walk away, how he could leave him to manage the family's vast political and financial empire. He asked Julian, his voice cracking, what on earth he was supposed to do. He was nothing. The study was silent for a moment, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Julian's gaze, sharp and analytical, swept over Leo. He wondered aloud, his tone laced with a faint, mocking curiosity, what a Prescott heir was doing at his door so late at night. The dim light glinted off the crystal tumbler of whiskey by his elbow as he approached, his presence as oppressive and familiar as the weight of Leo's own inherited name. Leo felt a tremor of his old anxiety return. He stammered out an order for Julian to get on his knees, that he needed to ask him something. The words hung in the air, absurd and desperate. Leo instantly regretted them, watching Julian's face for a reaction. A low chuckle echoed in the quiet room. Then, with a soft thud of knees on the antique Persian rug, Julian knelt. The act was so unexpected it sent a jolt of panic through Leo, his own legs feeling weak, as if he might be the one to collapse. He begged Julian not to relinquish his power. Julian looked up, his expression a carefully constructed mask of confusion, and asked if restoring full control to Leo wasn't the very thing he and the family's old guard had been dreaming of. Even on his knees, Julian's posture was ramrod straight, his bespoke suit uncreased. The deference was a performance. The arrogance in his voice was real. Leo insisted he had no part in the coup. He had been perfectly content, completely confident, with the family's affairs in Julian's hands. He didn't want the responsibility. He confessed, his voice dropping to a miserable whisper, that he simply wasn't capable. He thought back to his university days, the way his eyes would glaze over in political science lectures. He'd chosen a rigorous STEM program specifically to escape the crushing weight of history and policy, the world his family had dominated for generations. He never imagined a freak accident involving his parents' private jet would catapult him into this nightmare. He could recognize the words on the financial reports and policy briefs, but strung together they were an incomprehensible language. The early morning briefings were more agonizing than any 8A calculus class, the drone of department heads more soporific than his least favorite professor. He remembered sitting in those meetings watching Julian command the room. Julian would speak, his arguments incisive and brilliant, outlining strategies that Leo could only vaguely grasp. Yet, some deep, uneducated instinct, the sixth sense of a student who was an expert at guessing on multiple-choice tests, told him Julian was always right. And the results were undeniable. Under Julian's de facto leadership, the family's approval ratings soared, their portfolio diversified and swelled, and a sense of stable, quiet prosperity settled over their sphere of influence. After one particularly masterful presentation by Julian, Leo had forgotten himself, slamming his hand on the boardroom table and shouting his approval, comparing him to a modern-day Machiavelli before catching himself and lamely adding that Julian's points were precisely what he had been thinking all along. The loyalists, the old guard who had served his father, would watch him with such profound disappointment and pity it was almost unbearable. He hadn't understood the depth of their plotting. These men, old enough to be his grandfather, had been working in secret, holding late-night strategy sessions, all to orchestrate this return to power for his sake. He'd never imagined they would actually succeed. In the boardroom that afternoon, they had beamed at him, their faces a sea of triumphant wrinkles, declaring that he was the true master of the Prescott legacy. The shock had nearly sent him tumbling out of his custom leather chair. He had forced a smile, murmuring congratulations and promising bonuses, while his mind raced. He had called them his benefactors, his saviors, while thinking that they had just signed his death warrant. All the while, his eyes kept darting to Julian, who sat impassively in his usual chair to the left, sipping a cup of tea. He was so unervingly calm, as if he hadn't just been publicly stripped of all authority. A cold dread washed over Leo. He wondered if this was the quiet before a hurricane. He silently prayed that Julian knew, that he understood Leo had no part in this. He feared Julian's anger, the possibility that this humiliation would be the final push for him to seize everything, permanently and ruthlessly. As if sensing his stare, Julian had looked up. Their eyes met across the long mahogany table. A slow, deliberate smile had spread across Julian's lips. Then he had stood, a model of decorum, and offered a slight bow. He'd congratulated Leo on his newfound strength, on finally being ready to take the reins. He wished him a long and prosperous leadership. The moonlight filtering through the study window now illuminated the same darkness in Julian's eyes that Leo had seen then. After listening to Leo's pathetic, heartfelt confession, Julian's expression flickered with something unreadable, perhaps a sliver of surprise. His posture remained that of a subordinate, but the atmosphere around him was charged with a dominant, predatory energy that seemed to press down on Leo. Then, Julian's lips curved into a slow, sly smile, like a fox savoring the moment before closing in on its prey. He suggested that what Leo truly wanted was for him to act as an advisor, to assist him with his duties. The word assist was spoken with a heavy, deliberate emphasis, and his gaze was hot and possessive, like a hunter tracking a prized target. In the dimly lit room, Leo missed the nuance entirely. He nodded enthusiastically, a fool hopping eagerly into a snare. He agreed that was it exactly for Julian to assist him. The smile vanished from Julian's face in an instant, replaced by a cool indifference. He asked why he should. He mused that being a retired consultant with a generous severance package sounded far more appealing. He could travel, indulge himself, live a life of leisure. Leo swallowed hard. Damn him, it did sound appealing. The thought of the mountains of paperwork waiting on his desk made his stomach clench. He pinched his own thigh hard and put on an expression of grave concern. He told Julian he couldn't be so selfish, that he had to think of the family's legacy, the thousands of employees, the stability they represented. Julian's reply was cold, stating that the Prescott legacy belonged to a Prescott, and the people were Leo's responsibility, not his. Desperate, Leo pleaded. He asked what Julian wanted. A higher title? A bigger stake? His choice of any socialite or starlet in the country. He would make it happen. He watched Julian's face, hoping for a flicker of interest. Julian gave a non-committal smile and pointed out that he had never lacked for money or influence. Leo's mind raced. Then it hit him. He brightened, snapping his fingers, certain he'd solved the puzzle. He offered to arrange discreet introductions to some of the most sought-after men in their circle. Before he could finish, Julian cut him off with a frown. He informed Leo he was only interested in one person. Leo asked which debutante from which rival family had caught his eye, promising to broker a deal. Julian interrupted him again, his voice flat. It was none of them. Leo felt a flash of frustration, forcing his lips into a strained smile and asking, with exaggerated patience, who it was then. Julian slowly raised his head, his dark eyes locking onto Leo's. The person he desired, he said, was both impossibly far and right in front of him. A cold stone dropped in Leo's stomach. Julian liked men too, and somehow he knew about Leo. How had his own orientation, a secret he guarded so closely, become known? He had never once entertained any of the suitable young women his parents had pushed on him, but that alone shouldn't have been enough proof. In their elite circle, such preferences were not unheard of, whispered about in private but never acknowledged publicly. Many powerful men kept discreet companions. If Julian were anyone else, with his sharp, handsome features and the lean, powerful build of a man who fenced in his spare time, he would be the ultimate prize. Leo himself had felt a dangerous spark of attraction the first time they'd met. But that was before he knew the man was a brilliant, menacing political animal. Seeing Leo's stunned silence, Julian took the liberty of standing. He was a full head taller than Leo, and he moved to a side table to pour a glass of water, waiting with unnerving patience for Leo to process the information. An idea, reckless and wild, took root in Leo's mind. What if he agreed? His eyes slid over Julian's broad shoulders and narrow waist. From a purely objective standpoint, he wouldn't exactly be making a sacrifice. Feigning a reluctant sigh, he gave a clipped nod. He told Julian fine, he agreed. Then, his mouth running ahead of his brain, he asked how Julian intended to have him. A deep, muffled laugh broke the tension. Julian set down his glass and closed the distance between them. As he advanced, Leo instinctively retreated until his back hit the cold wall. Their faces were inches apart, Julian's warm breath ghosting across Leo's skin. A hot blush crept up his neck, flooding his face. He squeezed his eyes shut, his lashes trembling. A second later, he felt a slight weight lift from his chest. He opened his eyes, bewildered. Julian was holding the antique St. Christopher medal that had been a gift from his mother, an object he never took off. He dangled it from its chain, his eyes glinting with mirth. He suggested the medal could serve as a token of their agreement. He then added, his voice a low purr, that Leo had seemed to be anticipating something else entirely. Leo denied it, his stammering voice betraying him completely. He mumbled that it was late and he had briefings in the morning, then turned to flee, calling over his shoulder for Julian not to forget his promise. Julian simply nodded from where he stood. As Leo hurried away, shame and a confusing sense of disappointment warring within him, he didn't see the way Julian's gaze darkened. His thumb rubbing obsessively over the warm silver of the medal, as if reining in an urge that threatened to undo all his careful planning. Julian was true to his word. The next day, he was in Leo's office, patiently deconstructing complex policy briefs, teaching Leo the art of governance. They worked through dinner, and the lessons continued late into the evening. Felt disturbingly like cramming for final exams again. Leo's personal aide knocked and entered, carrying a tablet displaying a list of potential dates for an upcoming charity gala. The aide mentioned that the old guard was pressuring Leo to make a public appearance with a suitable partner. Under Julian's intense, probing gaze, Leo felt a prickle of unease. He waved it away, stating that he and Julian had important matters of state to discuss, and that the gala could wait. After the aide left, Julian set down his fountain pen. His voice was laced with scorn as he remarked that it was getting late, and he wouldn't want to interfere with Leo's romantic prospects. He started to rise, but Leo shot out a hand and grabbed his sleeve. His face flushed. He confessed that he'd forgotten to mention he was only interested in men, that he'd never had any intention of pursuing the women on that list. When Julian's expression remained unchanged, Leo acted on pure impulse, standing on his toes and pressing a light, fleeting kiss to Julian's lips. Before he could pull away, a powerful arm snaked around his waist, pulling him flush against a hard chest as Julian viciously deepened the kiss. On Julian's birthday, Leo learned from the estate staff that Julian, an orphan who had clawed his way up from nothing, always spent the day alone. A strange, protective ache bloomed in Leo's chest. That evening, driven by an impulse he didn't understand, he went to Julian's private penthouse. He found him on the terrace, a solitary figure against the glittering cityscape, nursing a glass of scotch. There wasn't even a bowl of nuts. His silhouette was stark and lonely. As Leo approached, Julian heard him and looked up. The faint smell of alcohol hung in the air. He tilted his head back, his gaze quiet and unfocused. Leo's eyes were drawn to a small, dark mole just beside his sharp Adam's apple, a detail that suddenly seemed incredibly alluring. Seeing the famously controlled Julian Vance looking so unguarded and possibly drunk, a mischievous thought sparked in Leo's mind. He waved a hand in front of Julian's face and asked if he was drunk, if he even knew who he was. Julian's expression was hazy as he shook his head. Leo puffed out his chest. He would graciously inform him. He, Leo, was the brilliant and powerful leader of the Prescott family, the smartest man in the country. And Julian, his dear advisor, was a big dummy. He pointed first to himself, then to Julian, a smug grin spreading across his face. He told him to repeat it. A dark glint flashed in Julian's eyes, so quick Leo missed it. He nodded slowly and mumbled the words back, asking if he had it right. He called Leo the smart one and himself the big dummy. Leo frowned, feeling like something was off, but before he could place it, Julian's husky voice suggested he should write it down so he wouldn't forget. Leo thought it was a brilliant idea and, eager to immortalize the moment, he pulled Julian towards the study. Inside, Julian didn't bother with the lights. Just as Leo turned to remind him, he was suddenly pushed down, his back pressed against the cool, smooth surface of the massive mahogany desk. He looked up into Julian's eyes, which were now perfectly clear and sharp, burning with a hunger that made Leo's skin prickle. The dumb bunny finally realized the fox hadn't been drunk at all. But it was too late. Julian's cold, commanding presence enveloped him. He felt the man's strength as he was held firmly in place. He tried to struggle, a pathetic, half-hearted attempt, but it was useless. Julian lowered his head, his mouth claiming Leo's in a kiss that was both punishing and tender, stealing the air from his lungs and taking his reason with it. When the kiss finally broke, Leo was panting, his head spinning. A sudden chill hit his skin. Julian had unbuckled his belt and was now tearing his expensive shirt open. The cool autumn air from the open terrace doors washed over his bare torso, a shocking sensation that did little to clear the fog from his mind. He watched, mesmerized, as Julian picked up a thick-nibbed fountain pen from the desk, its ink a custom, permanent blend gifted by a foreign dignitary. With the intense focus of an artist, Julian drew two large, sweeping characters on Leo's chest, one on each side, gift. The strokes were bold and arrogant, the ink dark against his pale skin. Lying there, all Leo could see was the sharp line of Julian's jaw and his look of utter concentration. He knew that ink wouldn't wash off. It would have to fade on its own, a process that could take over a month. Later, standing before a mirror, Leo stared in disbelief at the marks on his body. He pulled his ruined shirt on, his face burning with a mixture of shame and fury. He spun around to face Julian, his voice a low growl. He snarled that he had come to keep him company, and Julian had responded by being shameless, lewd, and degrading. He accused him of lusting after his body and told him he had gone too far. He warned him that even a cornered rabbit will bite. Julian, entirely unrepentant, let out a low, magnetic laugh that seemed to vibrate in the dark room. He remarked that a lamb who offers himself to the wolf shouldn't be surprised when he's eventually devoured. The look in his eyes grew more intense, more dangerous, and Leo shivered, blaming it on the cold. The next morning, at the daily briefing, Leo was certain Julian's eyes were boring into his chest, right where the ink was hidden beneath his starched shirt. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, holding a thick report in front of him like a shield. After the meeting, he practically ran from the room, only to hear a lazy, familiar voice call after him, asking why he was in such a hurry. Leo froze, the memory of the previous night flooding back, of Julian's voice, deeper and rougher than usual, whispering instructions in his ear, telling him to be good, to hold still, him that if he made a mistake he would just have to find another blank space on Leo's body to write on. He turned, his face heating up, and saw Julian watching him with that same infuriatingly amused expression. He asked curtly if he needed something. Julian replied smoothly, asking if he needed a reason to speak to the head of the family. The aides and secretaries nearby kept their heads bowed, pretending not to hear the advisor's brazenly familiar tone. To Leo, it felt less like insubordination and more like a private, intimate taunt. That evening, bored and restless, Leo asked his aide if there was any interesting gossip. The aide, ever perceptive, leaned in and reported that while things were quiet at the estate, there was a rumor circulating that Julian Vance had developed a taste for male company and had been seen frequenting the Velvet Curtain, an exclusive downtown club. A dull, heavy feeling settled in Leo's chest. An unfamiliar irritation flared. He asked if that was so, then announced that he would go see this place for himself. Perhaps he'd find some beauties to his liking and recruit them for his personal staff. He found the club to be a disappointment. After wandering through the lavish, dimly lit rooms for an hour, he hadn't seen a single man who could hold a candle to Julian. He was about to leave when he spotted a familiar figure on the top floor. A waiter was delivering drinks to a private booth, and through the partially open door, Leo saw Julian. He crept closer and heard that deep, unmistakable voice, dripping with casual contempt. Julian was saying that there was no greater thrill than humbling someone of high station. This transaction, he concluded, was proving to be well worth his while. The words hit Leo like a physical blow. The air rushed from his lungs. A bitter, self-mocking smile touched his lips. Why should he be upset? It had always been a transaction, a simple quid pro quo. He took a deep breath, forcing back the sting in his eyes, and left. Back at the estate, the ugly feeling wouldn't go away. He looked at the pile of work on his desk and, channeling his misery into productivity, he started to work. Back in college, anger and heartbreak had always made him a brutally efficient problem solver. With no other distractions available, he attacked the reports with a vengeance. He would become a man of business, of duty. He worked through the night, not even realizing when he finally slumped over the desk, asleep. His last conscious thought was that being a carefree idiot had been so much easier. He slept fitfully, murmuring Julian's name in his dreams, calling him a traitor, a user, the man he hated most in the world. He was woken at dawn by a warm, rough texture against his cheek. It was Julian's palm, calloused from years of fencing, gently wiping a tear track from his face. He heard a faint, almost inaudible sigh. When Leo's eyes fluttered open, Julian was looking at him with a complex expression, a mix of something that might have been regret and something harder. He remarked with a wry smile that Leo was crying in his sleep while cursing someone else's name. The last dregs of sleep vanished, replaced by the cold, sharp memory of the night before. Leo jerked his head away, slapping Julian's hand aside. He said coldly that it had nothing to do with him. Julian's face slowly hardened. Leo, summoning all his courage, bit out the words, demanding to know who gave him permission to enter his private office and telling him to get out. Julian's lips twisted into a sneer. He gestured to the completed paperwork on the desk. He asked if Leo, now that he'd learned all he needed, was ready to cast him aside. It was true that Julian had been a patient and thorough teacher. He had taken the most complex ideas of governance and finance and broken them down until even Leo could understand. He had taught him how to rule. For a moment, Leo felt a pang of guilt. He dropped his gaze. He said, "So what if he was?" It was always a transaction, and now he no longer required Julian's services. The deal was over. Suddenly, Julian surged forward, pinning him against the chair. He kissed him, hard and angry, a bruising collision of lips and teeth. The coppery taste of blood filled Leo's mouth. Just as he thought Julian would push it further, he abruptly pulled back. His eyes were devoid of any warmth, any desire. They were chips of ice. He turned and walked out of the office without another word. For several days, Julian cited illness and was absent from all meetings. Leo didn't see him. He told himself it was for the best, that he didn't care. But at lunch, he would stare at his food, his appetite gone. His aide, noticing his foul mood, informed him that General Davis, concerned for his well-being, had arranged for a private performance by a famous illusionist to lift his spirits. Leo, after a moment's thought, agreed. The illusionist arrived shortly after. Leo waved him in, uninterested, and told him to skip the formalities and just begin. The man slowly raised his head, and Leo's jaw dropped. Looking back at him with a knowing grin was Owen, his wisecracking roommate from his university science program. Once he had dismissed all the staff under the pretext of wanting a private show. The two of them sat cross-legged on the floor. Leo demanded to know how long he'd been here. Owen said it had been over a year. He marveled at Leo's luck, ending up as the head of the Prescott dynasty. Leo grumbled that it was a nightmare, reminding Owen of his complete ineptitude in anything related to politics or history. Owen explained his own story. He had found himself the son of a small tech entrepreneur whose company went bust. He started using his knowledge of physics and chemistry to create elaborate stage illusions, becoming a viral sensation and a sought-after performer for the elite. It was through his now boyfriend, General Davis, that he'd heard descriptions of the new Prescott heir and suspected it was his old friend. Leo punched him playfully on the shoulder, full of envy. He reminded Owen of their pact, that whoever got a serious boyfriend first was a loser. Owen just laughed and slung an arm around his shoulders, telling him not to be an idiot. As the head of the family, he could have any man he wanted. Before he could finish his sentence, the office doors burst open with a deafening crack. Julian stood silhouetted against the light, radiating a palpable aura of menace. Before Leo could even scramble to his feet, Julian was across the room. A sharp, sudden pressure bloomed at the base of Leo's neck, and the world went black. His last sight was of Julian's eyes, red-rimmed and filled with a terrifying, possessive madness. When he came to, the opulent, familiar decor of Julian's penthouse bedroom surrounded him. A dull ache throbbed in his neck. He tried to raise a hand to touch it and was stopped by the clink of metal and the cold weight around his wrist. He sat up abruptly, finding all four of his limbs bound to the bedposts with sleek, velvet-lined restraints. He had been kidnapped and imprisoned. So this was it. Julian was making his move. He'd always suspected this day might come, but after everything that had passed between them, he had allowed himself to hope. He looked at the restraints, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. It was all a lie. The flirtations, the confessions, the claims of wanting only him, all a calculated deception to get close. His eyes burned with unshed tears, his chest feeling as though it were being torn apart. The door opened, and Julian walked in carrying a tray of food. He informed Leo, his voice calm, that he had already sent word to the estate that Leo was unwell and would be in seclusion for a few days. He could stay here, undisturbed. Julian sat on the edge of the bed and tried to feed him. Leo turned his head away, his voice dripping with ice as he demanded to know what Julian wanted from him. Julian's hand paused, and his eyes darkened with a flicker of what looked like hurt. He whispered for Leo to be good, to just stay with him, just the two of them. He promised to take very good care of him. He tried to offer a spoonful of soup again. Leo thrashed, nearly knocking the tray from his hands. Julian's face hardened. One hand shot out to steady the tray, while the other seized Leo's chin, forcing his mouth open for a brutal, punishing kiss. When he finally pulled back, his thumb stroked Leo's swollen lower lip. His voice was cold as he asked if Leo would prefer to be fed by another man, perhaps that charlatan illusionist. Leo's mind reeled. This wasn't a coup. This was jealousy. He tried to explain that there was nothing between him and Owen, but a spoonful of risotto was pushed into his mouth, silencing him. Julian informed him he was not in the mood to hear his excuses. For the next 3 days, Julian was gone. A silent maid brought his meals, and with no one to force him, Leo refused to eat. On the morning of the 4th day, he awoke to the feeling of being watched. Julian was standing across the room, his gaze intense. He stated that the staff had told him Leo hadn't eaten in 2 days. Leo turned his head to the wall, ignoring him. The maid brought breakfast and left. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by a soft sigh from Julian. He said fine, if he wouldn't eat, he wouldn't eat. He then sat at the small table and began to eat the breakfast himself. The smell of bacon and coffee wafted over, torturing Leo's empty stomach. He watched Julian take a large bite of pancakes, Leo's favorite. He thought, you have to try harder than that. You have to force me. You can't just respect my wishes now. He watched, horrified, as Julian loaded his fork with the last, largest piece of bacon. That was it. He lunged, catching Julian's wrist and shoving the bacon into his own mouth. Since there was only one set of cutlery, he snatched it and began to devour the rest of the food. A low chuckle came from Julian. His eyes were burning as he watched Leo eat. Feeling self-conscious, Leo asked what had happened to Owen. The smile vanished from Julian's face. His eyes turned glacial. He said he was dead. The fork clattered to the plate. Leo's blood ran cold. He stared at Julian, unable to process the words, and whispered for him to repeat it. Julian said it again, his voice flat. He had killed him. Leo flew out of his chair, grabbing the front of Julian's shirt, screaming at him to say it one more time. Julian's expression was dark. He scoffed that Owen was just a stage magician, and killing him was of no consequence. He asked if Leo was heartbroken over his new little pet. Hate, pure and undiluted, churned in Leo's gut. He snarled that he could kill Julian, too. Julian's face was a mask of grim, stubborn pain, But then he smiled, a terrible, broken thing. He said he'd like to see him try. He challenged Leo to escape and get his revenge. For days, Leo was a ghost, lying in bed, staring at nothing. Julian only came at night, holding his unresponsive body as he slept. One evening, Leo woke up feeling incredibly weak. Julian entered with dinner and began the ritual of forcing him to eat. This time, Leo's body rejected the food immediately, and he was sick. After Julian had cleaned him up, he returned with a bowl of broth. As he tried to feed him again, Leo struggled, kicking out and striking Julian hard in the abdomen. Julian gasped, his face going white for an instant. A dark stain began to spread across the fabric of his shirt, near his waist. Leo froze, staring at the blood, confused. The next second, his own vision tunneled and he collapsed. The last thing he saw was Julian's face, contorted in a mask of panic and regret, his eyes wide and wet as he lunged toward him. He was in and out of consciousness for a long time, burning with fever. When he finally woke again, he felt stronger. The restraints were gone. Julian was slumped in a chair by the bed, asleep. Leo looked around the room, remembering the first time he had come here, desperate for help. He couldn't understand how everything had gone so wrong. A shadow fell over him. A warm hand touched his forehead. He looked up into Julian's tired, worried eyes. Julian looked exhausted, but his voice was cool and distant. He informed Leo that the doctor said the fever had broken, and he should make a full recovery. He stood and placed a fresh set of clothes on the bed. He told Leo to rest, and that he would arrange for his escort back to the estate. Before Leo could even process that he was being let go, Julian turned and left the room, his back straight, his shoulders slumped in a way Leo had never seen before. An hour after he was returned to his own office, a disheveled Owen was unceremoniously dumped on the carpet by Julian's security guards. They compared notes. Julian hadn't harmed Owen at all. He'd simply had him driven to a remote location and threatened to stay away from Leo. Leo stared into space, his thoughts a tangled mess. Owen, meanwhile, was impatient to leave, saying he had to get home and appease a very jealous general. As he stood, Leo noticed Owen's shirt was unbuttoned, revealing an elaborate leather harness underneath. He raised an eyebrow, teasing that he and the general were into some interesting things. It turned out that Owen's attempts to see Leo had been misinterpreted by General Davis, who had accused him of using their relationship for social climbing. The harness was part of an elaborate plan of apology. Noticing Leo's smirk, Owen just grinned back. Before he left, Leo asked hesitantly if that sort of thing really worked to smooth things over. Owen turned, wiggling his eyebrows. He asked if Leo had ever heard the phrase that the best way to end a fight is in bed. The next morning at the briefing, Leo was a bundle of nerves. His aide quietly informed him that Julian wasn't present but had sent a formal memo. His heart hammered against his ribs as he unfolded the paper. Julian was requesting a permanent transfer, an overseas position in the family's most remote Asian branch office, with no intention of returning. The old guard was ecstatic. Leo felt the floor drop out from under him. He stumbled through the rest of the meeting in a daze. The moment it was over, he ran from the estate, heading straight for Julian's penthouse, terrified he was already too late. The penthouse was a flurry of activity, with movers packing boxes. Leo's panic intensified. He burst into the study and found Julian in quiet conversation with Liam, the brilliant young Rhodes Scholar who had been this year's top recruit. Liam was clearly being groomed as Julian's successor. Seeing the two of them talking so amicably sent a fresh wave of complicated jealousy through Leo. Liam started to rise, but Leo waved him down. then turned to Julian, who was calmly sipping his tea as if Leo weren't there at all. He asked if Liam could leave them alone. Julian's voice was frigid. He told Leo to issue his orders, that he no longer needed to ask permission. After Liam scurried out, Leo took a deep breath and said he was sorry, that he had been wrong and had misunderstood. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, a soft, humorless laugh. Julian said that the head of the family is never wrong. Leo moved closer, reaching for his sleeve. Julian set down his cup, smoothly moving his arm out of reach. The casual rejection stung more than any harsh word. Leo couldn't stand the coldness. He blurted out that he and Owen were just friends, that he'd only been learning some illusionist tricks from him in private because he didn't want to look foolish. He told Julian to go to General Davis if he didn't believe him. Then, remembering his own grievance, his voice choked with emotion. He said he had his own reasons to be angry, that he'd gone to the velvet curtain. Julian's composure finally cracked. He looked up, his voice sharp with concern, asking what he was doing there, if he was all right. Leo scoffed, saying he just wanted to hear how Julian bragged about degrading him. He turned to leave, his heart aching, saying Julian could do whatever he wanted. A strong hand clamped around his wrist, stopping him. He turned back, surprised. Julian explained that the person he'd been talking about wasn't Leo. It was the head of a rival family, the patriarch of a corporate espionage ring he'd been investigating. They had been meeting at the club. The rival's son had been planning a hostile takeover, and that night, Julian had been speaking to an informant. The plan had gone wrong, the informant had betrayed him, and Julian had been injured subduing the man's security detail. He had indeed taken great pleasure in dismantling the man's reputation and fortune, especially after discovering he had a history of blackmailing and abusing young employees. The rival was now ruined, his son in prison. The hand on his wrist pulled sharply, and Leo stumbled, landing squarely in Julian's lap. He tried to protest, but Julian's mouth captured his, and his hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. When Julian finally released him, he rested his head against Julian's chest, breathless. Julian's lips trailed down his neck, his fingers fumbling with the buttons of his shirt, his touch setting Leo's skin on fire. Then his hand brushed against something unfamiliar beneath the fabric. His voice was a raw, ragged whisper. What was this? Leo's heart leaped into his throat. He'd forgotten. With Julian already won back, he hadn't intended to resort to Owen's advice. But under Julian's burning, possessive gaze, he took a breath, reached for his belt buckle, and slowly began to undress. The stark red of the intricate rope harness stood out against the pale skin of his torso, a shocking, vivid web of knots and lines. Julian went utterly still, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly as they traced the path of the ropes. A muscle jumped in his jaw. His composure, so carefully maintained, finally shattered. A low groan escaped his lips. That blinding red seemed to snap the last thread of his control. His gaze devoured every inch of skin, every intersection of flesh and fiber. Leo kept his head down, a slow, deep blush spreading across his face and chest. Julian's voice, when he finally spoke, was a reverent, forbidden whisper. He asked what Leo was doing. The sound, the question, the sight of him bound and offered up, seemed to awaken a beast that had been sleeping just beneath Julian's surface. He leaned in, his lips brushing Leo's forehead, his cheek, his jaw, his hot breath a promise as he moved toward his mouth. His eyes were dark with a fierce, resolute hunger, the look of a man about to claim what was irrevocably his.